October 1996, Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, 29 Palms, California. The Mojave Desert never truly sleeps. Even after the sun disappears behind endless ridges of rock and sand, the ground clings to the day's heat for a few precious hours before surrendering it to the cold. By midnight, the warmth is gone. A dry wind sweeps across the desert floor, carrying grains of sand that whisper against helmets, packs, and camouflage netting. Every shadow grows deeper. Every sound seems farther away than it really is. Inside a hastily prepared defensive perimeter, Marines from the 2nd Marine Division settled into another long night of field training. Their rifles rested across sandbags. Night vision devices scanned the darkness beyond the wire. Fire teams rotated through security positions with practiced discipline, each Marine trusting the man beside him as much as his own weapon. To them, it was another demanding exercise. To the force waiting beyond the reach of the floodlights, it was an opportunity to test centuries of battlefield tradition against one of the world's most respected fighting organizations. Somewhere in that darkness, soldiers of the Royal Gurkha Rifles lay motionless beneath the desert sky. They had not come to overpower the Marines with numbers. They had come to disappear. Hours later, long after the exercise had ended, and the first rays of sunlight touched the California desert, Marines and Gurkhas would stand together exchanging quiet nods of respect. Veterans from both sides would remember that night, not because one force had humiliated the other, but because each had discovered something unexpected about the men they faced. The lesson was simple. Reputation can earn attention. Only actions earn respect. To understand why that night became part of military folklore, you first have to understand the remarkable history carried by the men from the Himalayan foothills. For more than 200 years, the word Gurkha has commanded admiration across battlefields on nearly every continent. Their story began not in the deserts of California, but among the steep mountain villages of Nepal, where survival itself demanded endurance, long before any young man dreamed of becoming a soldier. In 1814, during the Anglo-Nepalese War, British commanders expected another swift colonial campaign. Instead, they encountered fierce hill fighters who knew every mountain trail, every ridgeline, and every hidden approach through unforgiving terrain. Outnumbered and often outgunned, the Nepalese defenders repeatedly frustrated experienced British officers through discipline, determination, and intimate knowledge of the landscape. When the conflict ended, something extraordinary happened. Rather than dismissing the men who had resisted them so fiercely, the British chose to recruit them. It was an unusual decision in military history. Respect had replaced resentment. Over the decades that followed, Gurkha regiments built a reputation. Through quiet professionalism, rather than grand declarations, they fought in distant campaigns across India, Europe, North Africa, Italy, and the dense jungles of Burma during the Second World War. Allied commanders repeatedly praised their discipline under fire, their ability to navigate difficult terrain, and their calm under immense pressure. Their most recognizable symbol, the kukri, became famous around the world. Yet those who served alongside Gurkhas often insisted that the curved blade was never the source of their effectiveness. Their greatest weapon was patience. Every movement had purpose. Every observation mattered. Long before taking a single step toward an objective, Gurkha soldiers were trained to study the ground, the wind, the rhythm of their surroundings, and even the habits of the people they were observing. Speed came only after understanding. That philosophy remained unchanged as the 20th century drew to a close. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, another military tradition had forged its own legacy through different battlefields and different wars. The United States Marine Corps had earned its reputation at places whose names became permanently etched into military history. Belleau Wood, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Chosin Reservoir, Hugh City. Each generation inherited the expectations created by the last. Every Marine understood a simple truth. The uniform carried history. Living up to that history required relentless preparation. By 1996, Marines training at 29 Palms had become accustomed to demanding exercises that pushed endurance, decision-making, and teamwork to their limits. The desert itself was an unforgiving instructor. Blazing heat during the day gave way to biting cold after sunset. Visibility changed by the minute as darkness swallowed the landscape. It was an ideal place to test soldiers. It was also an ideal place to discover whether reputation alone could survive first contact. As daylight faded on the evening of the exercise, officers from both forces reviewed final instructions. Maps were folded away. Radios were checked one last time. Watches were synchronized. Across the training area, Marines settled into their defensive positions. Confident in their preparation, far beyond the perimeter, the Gurkhas waited without speaking. Neither side viewed the coming hours as a contest of pride. Both viewed them as an opportunity to learn from an opponent whose reputation had already been earned over generations. Before dawn, that opportunity would become something neither side would forget. As twilight faded, the training area settled into an uneasy calm. The last streaks of orange disappeared beyond the mountains, leaving the California desert under a sky crowded with stars. For the Marines inside the defensive perimeter, the mission was straightforward. Secure the position, detect any approaching force, and respond before the attackers could penetrate the line. Every Marine knew the drills. Listening posts were established beyond the main perimeter. Fire teams rotated through observation sectors. Radio operators checked in at scheduled intervals, while squad leaders quietly moved between positions, ensuring every rifleman understood his responsibilities. The routine was familiar. That familiarity was both a strength and a potential weakness. Several hundred meters away, the Gurkha patrol prepared differently. There was no unnecessary conversation. Final equipment checks were performed with practiced efficiency. Loose straps were tightened. Anything capable of reflecting moonlight or making noise was secured. Every movement was deliberate. The patrol commander studied the terrain one final time. Rather than searching for the shortest route, he searched for the least predictable one. A shallow depression crossed the desert floor before disappearing behind scattered brush. Dry washes carved through the training area, offering natural concealment. Small rises in the terrain interrupted lines of sight, creating pockets of darkness where a careful soldier could disappear almost completely. The route was chosen. The infiltration began. No one hurried. Every few minutes, the patrol paused completely, allowing the desert to settle back into silence before moving again. A distant generator hummed near the Marine position. Occasionally, a vehicle could be heard far across the training range. Otherwise, nothing. For experienced infantrymen, silence is never empty. It carries information. A barking dog, a startled bird, the sound of loose gravel shifting beneath a boot. Even the wind can reveal movement if it changes unexpectedly. The Gurkhas advanced by treating every sound, and every absence of sound, as part of the battlefield. Inside the Marine perimeter, the night seemed uneventful. One sentry adjusted his night vision device, another quietly scanned the horizon through binoculars. The changing shifts happened exactly as rehearsed. Everything appeared normal. Yet the attackers had already begun studying those routines, noting where observation overlapped, identifying brief moments when attention naturally shifted, watching for patterns that repeated themselves. Military instructors often describe combat as a contest of observation. The side that understands more usually gains the initiative. That principle was being tested minute by minute. For the Marines, technology provided valuable awareness. For the Gurkhas, patience provided another kind of awareness altogether. As midnight approached, temperatures continued to fall. The warmth stored in the sand vanished into the night air. Breath became visible. Hands stiffened inside gloves. Fatigue crept in quietly, the kind that makes minutes feel like hours. Training is designed for moments like these. Anyone can remain alert during the first hour. Maintaining that same focus after midnight is far more difficult. The instructors observing the exercise understood exactly what they were watching. This was no longer simply a test of tactics. It had become a test of discipline. Beyond the perimeter, the Gurkha patrol reached its final covered position. Ahead lay open ground. Crossing it would carry the greatest risk of detection. The patrol commander waited. No orders were spoken. None were needed. Each soldier already knew the next step. Across the defensive line, a Marine scanned the darkness one more time. He saw only empty desert. But the night was about to prove that the most dangerous movement is often the movement you never see. The desert remained silent. For several long minutes, nothing appeared to change. The Marines maintained their watch, scanning sectors exactly as they had been taught. Every movement followed procedure. Every report was delivered on schedule. Confidence came not from overconfidence but from repetition. They had trained for nights like this countless times. Yet every defensive position, no matter how disciplined, has moments measured not in minutes, but in seconds. The Gurkha patrol had been waiting for one, flat against the cold desert floor. The lead scouts watched the rhythm of the perimeter with remarkable patience. They were not looking for carelessness. They were looking for something far more common, the natural flow of human attention. A sentry shifted his weight. Another Marine briefly turned to acknowledge a quiet radio update. Nothing about either action was wrong, but together they created a narrow opening. The patrol commander gave a single-hand signal. The infiltration began. No one sprinted. No one rushed. The Gurkhas moved with slow, controlled precision, using every fold in the terrain as concealment. Knees and elbows carried their weight across the sand. Equipment remained secured against the body, to prevent even the faintest metallic sound. The desert itself became part of their camouflage. A gust of wind swept across the training area. Tiny grains of sand danced through the air, briefly reducing visibility. The patrol advanced. One Marine paused, studying the darkness ahead. He sensed something. Not movement, not a figure, just the uneasy feeling that someone might be watching. He held his gaze for several seconds before continuing his scan. Nothing. The silence returned. A few dozen meters farther forward, the lead Gurkha stopped behind a low rise in the ground. From there, he could clearly observe the nearest section of the Marine perimeter. He watched, counted, measured distance. Then he slowly eased backward, relaying information with quiet hand signals that required no spoken words. Behind him, the rest of the patrol adjusted course by only a few degrees. Sometimes, that tiny correction is the difference between detection and success. Back inside the Marine position, squad leaders continued checking their sectors. Training had taught them to expect probing attacks, deception, and sudden pressure. What they could not predict was exactly where it would come from. The exercise instructors observed from a distance, recording every decision. This was not simply about identifying who won, it was about revealing strengths, exposing vulnerabilities, and giving both forces lessons they could carry into future operations. Minutes later, the first decisive moment arrived. One Gurkha scout reached a position that, under simulated combat conditions, placed him inside the defensive line without having been detected. The observer marked the infiltration. The patrol had achieved its initial objective. But the exercise was far from over. Within moments, the Marines reacted. Reports moved quickly through the chain of command. Leaders repositioned fire teams. Security sectors shifted. Instead of freezing after the surprise, the defensive force reorganized with impressive speed. That response caught the attention of the Gurkha patrol. The initial infiltration had succeeded. Holding the advantage would prove far more difficult. As the exercise intensified, both sides abandoned any assumptions they had carried into the night. The Gurkhas discovered an opponent who adapted under pressure with remarkable speed. The Marines found themselves confronting an adversary, whose greatest weapon was neither technology nor numbers, but extraordinary discipline. The contest had entered a new phase. No longer was it about stealth alone. Now it would become a test of decision-making, endurance, and teamwork, qualities both military traditions had spent generations refining. By the time dawn approached, neither side would be thinking about reputation, only performance. The first breach changed everything. Until that moment, the exercise had belonged to the attackers. Every careful movement, every patient observation, every calculated step through the darkness had unfolded, almost exactly as the Gurkha patrol intended. They had reached positions few expected them to reach. Now the advantage began to shift. Across the Marine perimeter, squad leaders responded with practiced urgency. Flashlights remained off. Voices stayed low. Orders traveled through hand signals, brief radio transmissions, and the confidence that comes only from repetitive training. Within minutes, the defensive line looked very different. Gaps that had existed only moments earlier were reinforced. Observation sectors overlapped more tightly. Fire teams adjusted their positions to prevent another silent approach. The Gurkhas noticed immediately. One patrol commander later reflected that the most impressive part of the night was not the initial infiltration. It was how quickly the Marines reorganized once they understood what had happened. There was no panic, no confusion, only an increasingly aggressive determination to regain control of the exercise. That determination forced the Gurkhas to adapt. Every military unit carries certain expectations about its opponent. Some prove accurate. Others disappear the instant the first objective is secured. The Marines had expected highly disciplined infiltrators. They found exactly that. The Gurkhas had expected a capable defensive force. What surprised them was the speed with which the Americans transformed a setback into momentum. Instead of remaining fixed inside their positions, Marine elements began probing outward, searching for likely withdrawal routes and attempting to deny the infiltrators freedom of movement. The desert, which had favored stealth only minutes before, was becoming far less forgiving. Low ridges that once concealed movement now became obstacles. Dry washes that offered cover also limited escape options. Every decision carried greater risk. The instructors observing the exercise watched carefully. This was precisely the point where valuable lessons emerged, not during success, but in the response to adversity. Military history offers countless examples of brilliant opening attacks. Far fewer stories celebrate the discipline required to recover from them. That recovery was unfolding in real time. As the hours passed, the exercise became increasingly dynamic. Simulated engagements forced both sides to think faster than they had planned. Small unit leaders made independent decisions without waiting for detailed instructions, trusting the judgment of the Marines and Gurkhas beside them. The contest was no longer between two famous military organizations. It had become deeply personal. Every section leader wanted to prove that his training could withstand the pressure of an unpredictable opponent. One Marine instructor later summarized the night's greatest lesson in simple terms. Good plans survive only until they meet another good plan. Neither force had arrived with a monopoly on professionalism. Both had earned their reputations through generations of disciplined training, and both were demonstrating why elite units never stop adapting. For the Gurkhas, patience remained their greatest strength. For the Marines, relentless initiative became theirs. Neither quality canceled the other. Instead, they collided in a way that left lasting impressions on everyone involved. By the time the eastern horizon showed the first faint hint of dawn, exhaustion had settled over the training area. Uniforms were coated with fine desert dust. Boots carried miles of silent movement. Faces revealed long hours without rest. The exercise controllers finally called an end. Weapons were cleared. Helmets came off. The tension that had dominated the night slowly dissolved into conversation. There were no celebrations, no defeated force, only professionals comparing experiences, discussing mistakes, and acknowledging the strengths they had witnessed firsthand. It was during those quiet conversations, not during the infiltration or the counterattack, that the exercise achieved its greatest purpose. Respect had replaced assumption. Both sides arrived knowing each other's reputation. They left understanding how those reputations had been earned. The lessons from 29 Palms would not remain in the California desert. Years later, many of the principles reinforced during that night. Discipline, adaptability, and mutual trust would appear again under far more dangerous conditions. When coalition forces found themselves serving together in real operations rather than training exercises, those future deployments would prove that the strongest alliances are often built long before the first shot is ever fired. Morning arrived quietly over 29 Palms. The first sunlight spilled across the desert floor, revealing a landscape that looked unchanged. The sand still stretched toward distant mountains. The wind still carried fine dust across the training area. Yet for the men who had spent the night maneuvering through that darkness, something had changed. The exercise was over. The lessons were only beginning. Marines and Gurkhas gathered near the command post for the after-action review. Maps were spread across folding tables. Instructors compared observations, and patrol leaders retraced the decisions that had shaped the night's events. There was little interest in declaring a winner. Training of this kind served a different purpose. Its value lay in exposing assumptions, before they became dangerous, habits on a real battlefield. The Gurkhas explained how they had selected their approach routes, using the terrain rather than speed to close the distance. Marine instructors, in turn, described how rapidly reorganizing the defensive line had prevented the infiltration from developing into a larger tactical failure. Each side had identified strengths in the other. Each side had also found areas where improvement was possible. That exchange mattered. Professional soldiers often learn the most when confronting opponents who think differently from themselves. The Gurkhas brought generations of experience in stealth, reconnaissance, and deliberate movement. The Marines demonstrated an organizational flexibility that allowed junior leaders to respond decisively. When plans changed without warning, neither approach was complete on its own. Together, they illustrated two complementary philosophies of infantry warfare. As equipment was packed away and vehicles prepared to leave the training area, conversations became less formal. A Marine lance corporal examined a Gurkha's kukri with genuine curiosity. The Gurkha carefully explained that the knife was a traditional tool long, before it became a military symbol. It was carried with pride, but its reputation had often overshadowed what truly defined the regiment. The weapon is only as good as the soldier using it. One British officer remarked, smiling as both groups listened. The Marines understood that sentiment immediately. Every service has symbols: the eagle, globe, and anchor. The kukri, badges, uniforms. But symbols alone never win battles. Training does. Character does. Discipline does. Those common values formed the strongest connection between the two forces. Years later, those connections would prove valuable in places far removed from the California desert. Following the attacks of September 11, 2001, coalition forces deployed across Afghanistan. British units, including Gurkhas, served alongside American forces during operations against insurgent networks, operating in difficult mountain terrain. Unlike the carefully controlled environment of 29 Palms, Afghanistan offered no reset button. Every patrol carried real risk. Every decision had consequences measured in lives rather than training objectives. Despite differences in nationality, doctrine, and equipment, coalition soldiers shared a common mission. Mutual confidence became essential. Veterans from those deployments frequently recalled the professionalism they observed in allied units. Gurkha patrols earned praise for their discipline and composure during demanding operations. American Marines, in turn, reinforced their reputation for determination, endurance, and aggressive leadership under pressure. Trust did not emerge overnight. It had been strengthened over years of combined exercises, shared instruction, and experiences like the one at 29 Palms. Military partnerships are rarely built through speeches. They are built through shared hardship, a freezing night, a difficult patrol, a successful recovery after a setback. Those moments create confidence that no classroom can replicate. Looking back, the 1996 exercise represented more than an exchange of tactics. It demonstrated an enduring truth found throughout military history. The finest professional soldiers are not those who believe they have nothing left to learn. They are those willing to study another capable opponent, accept difficult lessons, and return stronger than before. That willingness to learn had united two proud military traditions separated by geography, culture, and history. It also ensured that when they later stood shoulder to shoulder as allies, respect had already been earned long before the mission began. Years pass quickly in military life. Uniforms change. Equipment evolves, Young recruits become seasoned non-commissioned officers, and veterans eventually leave active service, carrying memories that rarely appear in official reports. Yet certain stories survive every generation, not because they prove one force was better than another, because they capture a lesson worth remembering. The training exercise at 29 Palms became one of those stories. Within Marine units, it was recalled as a reminder that even the best trained force could encounter an opponent whose methods challenged every expectation. Among Gurkha circles, it was remembered as an example of facing a military renowned not only for its fighting spirit, but for its refusal to remain on the defensive after being surprised. That mutual respect was the true outcome of the night. Military history is filled with famous rivalries, dramatic victories, and crushing defeats. But some of its most valuable moments occur away from the battlefield, during joint exercises where soldiers discover how another professional force thinks, adapts, and overcomes problems under pressure. Those experiences influence future operations in subtle ways. A Marine who has trained with elite foreign infantry gains a broader understanding of different tactical approaches. A Gurkha who has worked alongside American forces leaves with greater appreciation for their speed of decision-making and decentralized leadership. Neither lesson diminishes the other. Instead, both strengthen the profession of arms. Perhaps that explains why elite military organizations across the world continue to train together despite differences in language, culture, and doctrine. Shared hardship builds confidence. Confidence builds trust. And trust, more often than any weapon or piece of equipment, determines success when circumstances become uncertain. For the Gurkhas, the values that carried them from the mountain villages of Nepal to battlefields across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East remained unchanged. Humility, discipline, patience, and unwavering commitment to the team. For the United States Marines, generations of hard-earned experience had instilled a similar belief that adaptability, initiative, and relentless determination could overcome even the most difficult setbacks. Different traditions, different histories, remarkably similar principles. The 1996 exercise demonstrated that elite status is never sustained by reputation alone. Every generation must earn it again. Every training exercise becomes another opportunity to test old assumptions against new realities. That willingness to be tested is what separates professional warriors from those who merely inherit a famous name. Today, visitors to 29 Palms see a vast training complex where Marines continue preparing for the uncertainties of future conflicts. Few passing through its rugged landscape would know about the quiet contest that unfolded there decades earlier. There are no monuments marking the routes taken through the darkness. No plaques identifying where infiltrators crossed the defensive line. The desert has erased those footprints, but it has not erased the lesson. Long after the dust settled, what remained was not a question of who won. It was the recognition that two of the world's most respected infantry traditions had met under demanding conditions and departed with something more valuable than victory. They departed with respect. In military culture, respect cannot be requested. It cannot be manufactured through publicity, and it cannot be awarded by reputation alone. It is earned in long nights of training, in difficult decisions made under pressure, and in the quiet professionalism displayed when nobody is watching. That is why stories like 29 Palms continue to endure. Not because they celebrate one military over another, but because they remind us that excellence recognizes excellence. Whether in the mountains of Nepal or the deserts of California, the truth remains unchanged.